Anyway, the one today, Highlights from Edgar Cayce Readings, Part 1. We put this disclaimer in the beginning, and I'll tell you, it really becomes important if you were to actually go to YouTube, and you know they have those bulletin board conversations that happen underneath the videos. So often it's like, who are you to be speaking, and saying this is what Edgar Cayce said about this or that? And I said, well, seriously? I said, we always have the disclaimer. This is the gospel according to John Schroeder, and that you get to hear what my take is on the readings that I present. And I give you every single one of the readings, and at the end of this, I even give you an email address to ask for all the original readings that I put this together from. Luckily, in this particular presentation, each one of the slides that comes up will have the reading number on it, so it's real easy for you to track it yourself. But I bring this up so that the information that's provided here is my interpretation of what I've seen there, and the most important part of this is if you don't like what you hear, I suggest you go study it, because chances are you're going to be able to see how it applies to you, what makes you happy, what brings the greatest joy to you that still works with the God of unconditional love that is so prevalent in the Cayce readings. So we will get to that at the very end, but let's go ahead and get started. The highlights here are all going to be covering basic concepts in the Cayce readings that have really made a difference in my life. So I'm going to talk about the principle itself, and then if you're not used to it, I give you a anecdote, story from my life, somebody I know that's a good example of each one of the cases. So in this one, this quote actually comes from the website. If you see right there in the logo in the corner, came from the ARE's website itself. And the reading number is 2995-3. Remember that those numbers are keeping the person who is asking the questions anonymous. Then with the dash, whatever the number is after that, that's telling me that this is the third reading that was given by that person. Anyway, I'll read it for you in case you can't read it in the back there. It says, "Thus ye may find in thy mental and spiritual self, ye can make thyself just as happy or just as miserable as you like. How miserable do you want to be?" That's a great question, because we're meant to be absolutely eternally happy, eternally joyful, eternally loving. And so if we find ourselves down here on earth and we find ourselves being miserable, I assure you that wasn't God's plan for us. And so how miserable do we want to be is a great question to say, how are we supposed to get ourselves out of where we are? It reminds me of a joke that, and it's a clean one, don't panic, Stephanie. So this guy walks into a bar. No, I'm kidding. It's some scientists were doing an experiment, and they just took some young kids and they said, we want to see if children are able to keep themselves entertained on their own if we give them everything that they want. So they took one kid and they put him in a room, and he had all of the electronics, all the Game Boys and Wii machines and Xbox and PlayStations and all that, and gave him all of the electronics he could play with, and he just went hog wild in there. He's enjoying the heck out of it, but I'll tell you, after the first couple of days, he burned out. He was just sitting around, and he was all bored and looking very unhappy. Then they had another room in which they had a kid in there, and he was more of a foodie. And so they had all of the candies, cakes, the baked goods, the things that he really enjoyed in life, and he just gorged on that. Really was having a great time until that burned out, and he was just like the first kid, and he didn't look any happier after a few days. The third room had a very unusual setup. The kid they put in there, the room was filled up to about here, up to his chest high in horse manure. And that's all that was in that room. But when they opened the door to check on him, that kid is just laughing, and he's playing and screaming and having a heck of a time and doing nosedives into the thing and then coming up over in the... So what in the world? So what are you so happy about, kid? And he goes, are you kidding me? With all this stuff in here, there's got to be a pony in this room someplace. So we can make ourselves as happy as we want to be, and it all has to do with the way we're going to interpret that. So what happens with that? You can tell it has to do with the expectations. In terms of the electronics or in terms of the food, it was some exterior thing that was coming to us trying to make us happy. The kid with the horse manure and all that, his expectation is it's always there with me. It's right in this room. I just need to find it. So that's an important one for being able to learn how to be happy regardless of what others do or what exterior circumstances there are. But one of the things that I find that is the most important that comes out of this quote is what separates the Cayce readings from just about any other religion that I have ever studied. So let's go ahead and take just any of the Christian religions, whether you're talking about Protestant or Catholic, going over to the Mormon side or anything that's Jesus-based. They have this program that you get with, in one way or another, you are going to be able to live your life on earth in such a way that you spend eternity in heaven afterward. So that's what Christianity looks like. It's not that much different for the Muslims. It's not that much different for Hindus, even though they believe in reincarnation, but that you are trying to figure out how to work out your karma here on earth so that you are able to move on and find nirvana down the road. Same thing with Buddhism and so on. So if you're seeing the pattern here, it's that we live a life on earth so we can get the heck out of Dodge and move on to heaven someplace else. Cayce is very clear that heaven is a state of mind. Therefore, the way that we would be able to avoid any further misery here on earth is to realize that heaven is wherever we go. So we figure out how we can enjoy heaven here on earth, and then we can go anywhere we want in time, space, and consciousness. We have the ability to be happy here. We have the ability to be happy wherever we might go. So if you want to get kind of a founding principle of the Cayce readings, it says we're not trying to put it off until tomorrow. We should be happy right here and right now. Next one is, I'll read it out in case you're taking notes, 3063-1. So the person 3063, the -1 being the first reading. We don't know if they had more from the number, but this is the first reading they would have had. This is a well-known quote from the Cayce readings. There is so much good in the worst of us, and so much bad in the best of us. It doesn't behoove any of us to speak evil of the rest of us. I don't know how much you folks have studied. There's a great book that is called Intimates Through Time. It's by Jeff Stern. You may have heard of the book called The Sleeping Prophet. Sleeping Prophet's probably the best-selling book he ever wrote on Edgar Cayce, but Intimates Through Time is probably the best book I ever read that he had written. Stephanie and I got to spend quite a bit of time with him once, back when he lived in Malibu and we lived in California, and I was on the ARE board at the time. So I got to know him personally. He's an interesting character for sure. But in Intimates of Time, he was able to go ahead and identify what the karmic conditions were from one lifetime to another, following basically the same four people: Edgar Cayce, Gertrude, his wife, Gladys Davis Turner, the stenographer, and the oldest son, Hugh Lynn Cayce. Not that others weren't in there as well, but those four he kept following from one lifetime to another to see what the interactions were and what the karmic patterns were that they dealt with in each life. And it was not the same. You would think that, there's this linear progression that says you're going to, keep dealing with these issues and line upon line, precept upon precept, as he says, that you are going to go ahead and improve each and every life, hopefully. That's what the goal is. But the fact is that there are different soul lessons to learn according to each life that we have. For instance, the life that Edgar Cayce had just before he came in March 18th, 1877, was as a pretty bad dude by the last name of Bainbridge. And he came in with psychic abilities in that lifetime, and he didn't get off on the right foot. He actually started using his psychic abilities to win at cards, to be able to get over on the ladies, to be able to make sure that he was, kind of a flim-flam man out there that was not using his gifts to the highest and greatest good of all the people he ran into. It was very self-serving. And he didn't have a good time that lifetime. So when we start thinking about this linear progression, we start here and we go up to the unconditional love of God. It certainly wasn't the case for him. But the very next life came back in as Edgar Cayce. So there are definitely, I just want to put aside that we would think that there is always, when you see Bainbridge, you would never think that that's Edgar Cayce that you have in front of you when you compare the two lives. So it's very different. One of the things that I have been able to use as an analogy to understand this is, have you ever seen the pictures of an iceberg floating in the water? And you know, there's that old scientific thing. It says only 10% of the iceberg is above the water surface at any given time. So 90% of what makes that iceberg up, just ask the people on the Titanic, is below the water level. And so what I consider that to be a really good analogy for what happens when we're talking about the soul. If we have a different personality, manifest it in different ways in each lifetime that we come in, we have different soul lessons that we're supposed to learn. So this time we could be really brilliant, the other time not so smart, or maybe we're physically talented, or maybe we have some kind of a musical gift, maybe we can do math. I mean, all of these things can change from one lifetime to the other and still be the same person. Okay, so that 10% that shows its face above water is just what personality needs to be manifest in that particular lifetime to be able to deal with the soul lessons that you came in to learn that time. So the understanding that that iceberg can just shift from one lifetime to another, and you see a completely different 10% of what the entire soul, starts to give us an idea of why we can say there's so much good in the worst of us and bad in the best of us. So it's never a consistency in there, especially as was demonstrated with Cayce's life as Bainbridge. I had how many people in here have ever had a psychic reading? Oh my gosh, most everybody. Okay. I'm going to explain a reading that I had many years ago now from a very gifted psychic. I will tell you already, she does not do them anymore because everybody will say, can I get a reading? She does not do the readings, but the lady that was gifted psychic, and so I was asking her questions, and in particular I had two people. One of them was a business partner of mine, and the other one was an employee that had worked for me. And I had consistent problems with them without going into details. And yet, as good as I was at being able to work with other people that were challenging to work with, and they weren't holding up their end of the bargain and didn't follow through on what they said they were going to do, I kept giving these guys and giving them another chance instead of making them stand up, and live up to what they were saying they were going to do. And I finally asked in a reading, what is it about these two people that I don't seem to be able to handle this? And the answer in the reading came back to me saying, this started a long time ago in the Atlantean land, was the exact wording of it. So we were all people alive back at the time of Atlantis. Now, the last inundation, last time, when they're putting the fingers up, Atlantis went down 12,000 years ago. So we're talking how far back is, that's just a minimum. It just said in the Atlantean land. It had been around for 100,000 years, for goodness sakes. So it could have been anywhere within that time frame. It said you three were all friends growing up together. And it said you grew up and you played together, and then you started working together, and eventually they started to work for you. It said, and then people started coming to you and telling you that these two were cutting their own side deals. Again, I don't need to get into details, and in fact, the reading didn't get into details. Just said they started, working things in their own interest. It apparently was like, don't pay him, we'll give you this on the side and you pay us, was probably as close as I can cut it. And said, and this is almost word for word, and you did not handle it well at that time, nor did it go well in succeeding lifetimes, and therefore you have the problems to be able, or challenges to be able to work through again. Said, however, there was a lifetime in which they were cousins in the same family in India, and you were not related to them, and they found you as an indigent. I was just one of the poor folks out there in the street, and they took me into the family and took care of me for the rest of my life. And that's why I was so torn. Here I am on the one side of we have this karmic pattern, and I'm just like, you're always messing up, and yet I feel like I owed him everything. So I just wanted to show you how karmic patterns can work for and against us to be able to give us these conflicting thoughts. So it was very helpful for me to get that past life information to understand, why do I keep going in these opposite directions like this? And here's the thing I wanted to recommend. If you ever have recorded, how many people have an audio recording of their psychic reading? So they're far fewer. If you have an audio recording of the psychic reading, how many have actually transcribed it? You transcribed it. Okay, I've got 3 people left out of the group that almost everybody had done it in the beginning. When I was transcribing that reading, and I got that one line in there, it said, back in the Atlantean times, things messed up and you didn't handle it well, I literally stopped typing because I recognized that I had killed them. I'm going, here I am feeling like, I'm a pretty good guy. I'm not going to, do anything particularly wrong, but it just hit me so strong going, okay, even if it was 12,000 or more years ago, I actually had these guys, I even got the feeling I didn't do it. I heard somebody to go take care of that for me. And so I was disgusted with myself. But at the same time, I come back here and I'm going, you know what? As good as I might feel like I'm trying to be this lifetime, what is this telling us up here? No matter who we are, whether we're trying to look at it in this lifetime, at some point in our history, we have been one of the least of these, myself included. So even if we're trying to say we're doing so well this lifetime, don't think that travels all the way back through every lifetime we've had. We've all hopefully been improving all along the way. But there was a statement that Jesus made. He says, these things and greater you will do. Do we think he was kidding? Think about that for a second. We really try to take Jesus at his word. He says, these things and greater you too will do. So if we're going to do greater things than Jesus did, and he did some pretty great things when he was on this earth, how can that possibly be true unless we too will eventually attain the Christ consciousness? So we know that there's that much good in the best and worst of us that we will eventually get there. And I have some other quotes that we'll be delving into that one a little more deeply as we go down through the rest of the concepts. The way that I like the concept that comes across to me here is encaptured in a quote as far as how I know we're all going to ultimately become perfect. And that's even by using our free will. And the line is, for how long can we resist the unconditional love of our Father? It is not, you're going to send them to basic training and do tough love, and we're going to just, whip the tar out of you until you figure out how to toe the line and all that. It says, how long can we resist the unconditional love of our Father? He's just going to continue to love us and love us and love us and forgive us and give us another chance and a chance and a chance, and it has as many as we need until we wind up seeing that it's in our best interest as well as everyone else's to manifest God's unconditionally loving ways in our lives. It's a pretty important one. Again, if you can't read the reading numbers, 5752-4. I even put the date next to there. This one was June 20th, 1934, was the date of the reading. So, soul development should take precedence over all things. Soul development should take precedence over all things. I remember one time I was listening to Edgar Cayce. He was certainly much older than me, but he had a tremendous impact on my life, Edgar Cayce's oldest son. I was lucky enough that my family got involved with the Edgar Cayce readings early enough that, if you were involved with the Cayce readings, you got to know the Cayce family. So it was my fortuitous luck to be able to get to know somebody like him. But he was giving a lecture out in California one time, and he was doing a question and answer session at the end, and he was really doing a push for joining what are called ARE study groups, Association for Research and Enlightenment study groups. We call it a Cayce group here. And in the study groups, it's just where you take a couple of books that were written specifically as a study for how to be able to search for God, find him, and manifest his unconditionally loving ways in your life. So that's in a nutshell, what the program is. Interestingly enough, the lady was saying, I hear that and I'd really like to be able to join a study group, but I just don't have time. And Hewlin just so kindly, he was even gentle about it, and he goes, and what is it that you find the time to do? That's an interesting rhetorical question. But if you're thinking if soul development should take precedence over all things, and when Edgar Cayce was asked or tasked with, let's do something that's really going to make a difference in this world, and he put together the books that are studied in the small group work that we do here, an ARE study group, if that's what the soul development has the best chance of working out as, and being able to do it through small group work like that, what do we find ourselves with the time to do? I've always heard this, hopefully I'm not at the end of my life, but when you hear people talking about, they're on their deathbed or whatever, they do not find themselves wishing that they had spent more time at the office. Wishing that they had worked harder to be able to earn more money or whatever it is. They wish that they'd spent that time with family and friends and been able to have more happiness in their life. So when we know how to bring a balance to our lives in both our health, well, I don't know if you know this, there's like 4 things that I kind of boiled everything down to when I first started studying this, probably in my 20s in earnest. Health, wealth, relationship, and spirituality. You find balance between those 4 things: health, wealth, relationship, and spirituality. You find the balance in those 4 things, and you truly will find happiness in your life. So if you can get that to happen, all the rest of it comes along pretty easily. And I started to find that as I did find balance in my own mind with things, it started to balance out in the physical, in 3 dimensions. One of the best examples I've ever seen for this is my own wife. After she started buying into it, I can only be crazy on my own for so long, and then she has to buy into it as well. But actually she started to watch it happen, where I'd say, I want to be able to, have life be in a certain way. So I don't have to, show up at 8 to 5 and sit at a desk and have this job description that, requires me to put the nose to the grindstone and not be master of my own clock, so to speak. And she saw that start to work for me as far as the way my career unfolded. We've been together over 35 years now. And she wanted to start doing that herself. Now, God bless her, when we first got together, and I've been self-employed just about my whole life, the poor thing was helping me do everything, so that when she got to be even over 30 years old, she didn't have much of a resume. Well, I helped my husband. That does not look good on a resume. So if you're ever going to go out there and try to be, get a job and be your own person, it's not easy. So when we came out here to Arizona, she said, okay, no problem. Let's go ahead and create the reality that I want, and I'll create the job that I want. So she went to work as a receptionist at a school, at a private college here in the area. Within 6 months, the president of the school had already tagged her and made her his personal assistant. As soon as, she put her time in the trenches for a year or so there and moved on, a position opened up to be the registrar for the school. And she did so well at being the registrar for the school, they actually hired her at a corporate level to go ahead and travel across the United States teaching other registrars how to be the perfect registrar from there. And then interestingly enough, the economy starts to go bad, and they're going, ooh, we grew too big, we need to do some cutbacks. And so in the department where she's working, she's seeing all the other coworkers with her, and she's looking at it going, they're offering a rather generous retirement plan if you'll voluntarily leave so that they don't have to lay people off or fire them. So she takes this very generous retirement package, retires, saving the jobs of the other people that are there. Maybe, we don't know what they were going to do. They didn't lay anybody off after she left. And next thing you know, what did you do? I think she went shopping for 3 months. Happily, apparently. So she went shopping for 3 months. We realized, it wasn't the paycheck that she was earning that was really so helpful as not having the shopping time. So she needed to go back to work. I'm giving her a bad time. Anyway, she went back to work, and she took a job as a local registrar because she was tired of traveling at that point, folks. Remember, she was flying all over the place. So she had a number of months off. She goes back to work for a school as a registrar again at much lower pay. And the funny thing was, is she goes, well, I feel like I ought to find a job that's similar, but I back up to the pay again. And so she started hiring around. The next thing you know, a university comes along and offers her as much money as she had been making before, and she goes and tells her old employer, I'm getting ready to, work for the pay that I'm actually supposed to be earning for this, and they bested it. So, I mean, what was that, 90 days? 6 months, if that? 3 to 6 months in there is when she had gone in there and she took that much lower job, said, I'm going to go take this other job, and they busted it by $1,000 and said, we really want to keep you here. Now she gets to work from home when she wants, and she's able to go ahead and work into the office, she can work from home, and it's just a win-win situation for that. And it allowed me to retire because she has all those benefits, and I don't have to worry about how I'm going to have my health insurance anymore. Because that is a problem these days, isn't it? So when you wind up having soul development taking precedence over all things, and we find that balance in our lives, and we allow God's prosperity to work through us, we find that we can work from the home. We find that we have a job that doesn't require us to do things that we don't like. And we find that we really can be happy wherever we are, even if sometimes there's a lot of pony dust around. That we know how to continue to be happy no matter what comes up with that. All right, so 1556-2, and this is question 42, so quite a long reading. And the question is, please explain for me what is meant by soulmate in relation to my own spiritual development. Now, there are a lot of definitions, stories of what a soulmate is in this world. Cayce does not have the same definition, as you will soon see. Those of any sect or group where there is the answering of one to another, as would be the tongue to the groove, the tenon to the mortise, or in any such where they are complement one of another. That is what is meant by soulmate. Not that as from physical attraction, but from the mental and spiritual help. Now, this is why very often you have people that are much more willing to come to a presentation about the Cayce readings rather than reading it yourself, because this one's actually pretty clear compared to some of his readings out there, and you can tell the syntax is not that easy. But what this is telling you right here is that soulmate has much more to do with two people who think the same way. Now, that doesn't mean that we're talking about Jesus and, Mother Mary. It can be. As a matter of fact, that was a case in which the Edgar Cayce reading said they were soulmates. Jesus and Mother Mary were soulmates because of the ideal that they shared together. But what are other types of soulmates? Bonnie and Clyde, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Thelma and Louise. When you go out there and you find two people that are just headed down the same path together and go, we're just really good buddies, and we really do buy into the same things, the same values and all that. So it can wind up being something that can help people to improve, or at its worst side, could you become codependent? Would that also be an outcome of what could happen there? What if you're both addicts to the same thing? What if you both have the same character flaw? And you wind up getting together along those lines. If you're not able to help each other to overcome those weaknesses, it can definitely work against you. So it's very important to understand from the idea of soulmate. I know that some people like to define it as in when God created all of us in the beginning, he did it in pairs. And there is that one person out there that is your perfect fit coming together. Cayce is very much against that. He says, no, we were all meant to be one. If you're talking about pairs, the only thing we're talking about is that everybody is all part of the one great big happy family. And so there is no concept in the Cayce readings, at least, that one soul was created to only be ultimately happy with another. We should be able to be soulmates with each and every other person that we run into. And that helps. It really does, because when you run into people that you don't necessarily like, have some bad times with, but you recognize that eventually we're all going to laugh about this someday. We'll get to that in another slide. But that you recognize that we're going to laugh about what the problems that seem like they're so tough right now are, that we're going to be able to overcome that eventually. So you know that everybody is a soulmate to everyone else, at least in the Cayce material. Now, my gosh, what if your soulmate, isn't even on Earth? Does that mean that you get to go through your entire life unhappy? I mean, I'm just trying to bring up the logical reasons why it wouldn't even make sense that there is only one other ideal person for you. Or how about if you got divorced? Well, wait a minute, did I divorce my soulmate and now I'm looking for second best out here? Is that what just happened? So it can be very confusing if you're not trying to understand that we are all of one family. I like this one. There is progress, whether ye are going forward or backward. The thing is to move. There is progress, whether you're going forward or backward. Just make sure you're moving. Everybody's heard that, physics analogy of the car. If you've got a car and you're pushing the thing from a dead stop, if that car is stopped and you're trying to push it, it's really hard to get it going. But if you've got that car going, you're going, whoops, I'm going 180 degrees in the wrong direction. It's not very hard to crank on that wheel while it's moving and quickly turn it around and get in the other direction. How does something like that work? What does that look like? How about Saul, who became Paul on the road to Damascus? I'm talking about a guy that would go out there and kick butt and take names of all of the Christians that were out there and even send them to their deaths because that's what he thought his job was to do. Then he goes, oop, I've been doing it all wrong. And the next thing you know, he's just as much a proponent in the other direction. If you want to talk about turning a car around in 180 degrees in the other direction, that's a great example of how something like that can happen. So the other thing that's certainly the idea is that we've got to be able to move for that reason. But is it a good idea, or is it ever a good thing that we don't necessarily have a good life? That we actually, as Cayce Readings put it, the entity gained or the entity lost. That's a summation of what he would constantly talk about when he was doing past life readings. And saying the entity gained in this incarnation or the entity lost in this incarnation, saying that overall you move closer or further away from God's unconditional love. Not that God moved, but we did. Well, first of all, the one way to look at it is that there is that line in the Bible or verse in the Bible that says all things work to good for those who love God. So that even of the worst things that we wind up doing, they can wind up being the things that turn it around. What's a good example of that? How about Alcoholics Anonymous? You go out and you have a real problem with alcohol, and the next thing you know, you're falling down drunk, and yet somebody pulls you up by your feet, mentors you to the point where you can put alcohol aside, and the next thing you know, you're able to go out there and help other people as well. Well, you had a really ugly experience in your life right there that turned into you being able to be of service to other people. All right? So, is that to say that you being a falling down drunk was a really awful thing? And the answer is yes. But did all things work to good for those who love God? Absolutely. If you keep looking at the longer distance picture, everything eventually works out, and God's really good at being able to figure out how to make that work. So I put together some slides here that's going to give you an example. Imagine that we have a chart here that says this purple line across the top, this is saying that we are finally perfect if we're up at that line. And remember, God created us in his perfect image right there. And if I were to take these lines that are coming out, and the further you move up in that direction, the more love you're manifesting, and the more you're moving down in that direction, you're manifesting some selfishness. In other words, that's probably not a good life, and neither is that one. But these are pretty good. If you're following how I've just arbitrarily thrown that out here, and you probably call where you got right there the dark night of the soul, where you go, does God even care about me, or does God even exist? So if you've got an idea of the way that that's looking right there, now let's go back to a moment, the previous quote. It says, it's important to move. There is progress whether you're going forward or backward, up or down. And it said, how does something like that look? Well, first of all, if we take the story of the prodigal son who took his inheritance and went away, and really didn't do very well, and says, hey, I'll come back and I'll be a servant in my father's house rather than try to live the way I am right now. And God was just so overjoyed when the prodigal son returned of his own free will to live in harmony and abiding by the rules, if you want to put it that way, in his father's house. So the son willingly did that. Now, At what part, if we say this is when the prodigal son was with his father, took his inheritance, got down here, and then got right back up and went over to the father's house, which one of those steps can we live without and still have the prodigal son get back home again? So let's go ahead and say, I'll take a sample out here right now with this red oval, just highlighting a couple of lives. And let's say, okay, that's a down life, and this is a good life, and a much more down life. But we started here, and we ended up here. So overall, wouldn't it have been better if he could have just gone from right here and hit right back up to the unconditional love of God again? And the answer is, well, we would like to think that, but was it possible for that individual to have made that spiritual growth at that time? And the answer is no. Each one of us has a different path for the things that we do right, the things that we do wrong. The good and bad choices that we make in life are unique to each one of us, and we are doing exactly what we need to stay on the path. So what happens here, and I've circled those lies, what happens if they go away? So now if I take this and I say, all right, there's nothing in there, if you stop, now your car's stopped. You're not in motion anymore to be able to ultimately get back over here again. So I'm trying to give you a visualization of what it means to say, stay in motion, good or bad. Even though we know to get from here to here seemed like a negative direction, we were still staying on the path that ultimately gets you right back up here. I'll give you an example of what this, something we deal with all the time. You go to see a movie. Everybody starts out happy in the movie in the beginning. Everything starts to go to hell in a handbasket right here, and ultimately it winds up having a happy ending. Now, if you know that it starts out happy, it ends up happy, are we a lot more patient with what goes on in the middle? Does it make sense that God would be much more patient with us when we're not acting our best? You know, you're not catching us at our best here on the earth. We all got to admit that, right? And other times out there. So if God understands that he's only watching the movie somewhere in this area and not being limited by time or space, God understands once we are at that part for infinity, we are spending infinity with our Father doing things even greater than Jesus did. And this little bad time right here is but a blink of an eye when you're looking at it in comparison to eternity. It's nothing to God. I'm sorry if you think that God has a tough job trying to love us, but from that position, he goes, this was just nothing. It's a snap of the fingers right there, and it doesn't matter if it's 100, 1,000, a billion, or a quadrillion, trillion number of years, it's still nothing compared to our entire existence doing things even greater than Jesus did. So I really want to make clear that even if we have negative things happening in our life, it is still moving forward, as it says there in 3027-2. Where are we in time? Oh, got it. All right. This is reading 3679-28. Peace must begin within self before there may be the activity or the application of self in such a manner as to bring peace in thine own household, in thine own heart, in thine own vicinity, in thine own state or nation. 3679-28. Who is that? Alvin, do you know? No, the fact that they had 28 readings means it's a name we'll probably know if we're to look it up. Not too many people get 28 readings without being part of the Cayce legacy or history at some point. So when you're looking at this, how easy is it to say the world ought to be this way? You know, we think that the world ought to be going in a particular direction. And what are we going to do in order to make that happen? The readings are saying, and it's no secret, everybody in here probably already buys into it, in terms of we have to make the changes within ourselves as opposed to going from without. I can tell you that so many people, and even when I've run into them in churches and such, where they go, we have got to be able to get everybody on the same side politically, because then we can vote to be able to pass laws so that it goes, in the direction that we want it to go. And then people have to do it. And I'm going, oh yeah, that's good. Nobody will ever smoke. Nobody will ever drink. Nobody will ever get addicted to drugs. Nobody will ever, I mean, you can pass all the laws you want. As a matter of fact, I'll go back to a reading in the Cayce readings. They said, is it a good or bad thing that prohibition came about? Remember, it didn't even last 15 years, but that was during the time that Cayce was giving readings. And they asked about the, was it a good idea that prohibition was made a constitutional amendment? His answer was fascinating. He said, the country has already decided to drink. The amendment decides whether or not you will make criminals out of your citizens. Oh, wow. I mean, if that isn't clearly stating what's going on, I said, it isn't a question of whether drinking's right or wrong. You can sit there and pass all the laws you want, but clearly this country has decided it's going to drink. So if you want to see the changes happen in the world, we need to work within ourselves instead of saying, let's go start a political movement. I'm not saying the political movements are bad. I'm saying, but if you're trying to get everybody else to change their, sordid ways or whatever, and we aren't trying to work on those within ourselves, how successful do we think we're going to be in that? A hot topic these days has to do with immigration, especially in Arizona when we're, so close to the border and the Hispanic population and all that. And so you have I think I've been reading in the papers, yeah, that's how old I am. I'm sorry, it was on the internet, really. But reading about the sanctuary cities are starting to really come to a head with the federal government in California, where they're going, okay, you're going to try to send, immigration after these undocumented people over in our country, or our state, and these sanctuary cities, we're going to work against the federal government to keep them from being able to implement those laws. And so it's starting to come to a head where are they going to fight it out in court? How tough does it get? Are you going to wind up having weapons pointed at each other as far as how you're going to wind up handling this thing? I mean, it's scary to think what can occur here. So that's one side of it, where you can go out there and say, we're going to solve it with laws and government and people trying to put their sway behind one political movement or another. Now, remember, I was raised in a family that believed very much in the principles of the Edgar Cayce readings. And I grew up in Southern California, so we always had the issue, not so much when I was young, but as we got older, of what immigration and the effect that it had on us there in Southern California. My parents took it upon themselves through want ads or private ads that were in the newspaper to sponsor people into this country from other countries. A good example was there was a woman, she was only 19 years old, had been ostracized from her family in India. And she wanted to immigrate over to the United States. She didn't have a prayer of being able to qualify to come into the United States. So my parents set up the relationship with her that they were going to sponsor her. She came over to this country with my parents guaranteeing and actually signed in writing that they would be taking care of her until she was able to stand on her own 2 feet. And it wasn't long. I mean, within the first year, she already had a job. In fact, she even went on to get married and had 2 lovely daughters, who I am still in contact with today. So it's a marvelous family, and she was a wonderful lady as well. But my parents went out there and said, I'm not going to try to vote in this direction or that direction as far as what happens with immigration. I am willing to go ahead and say, come to my house. I will make sure that you get established within this country. Now, imagine if we wound up working the problem that way instead of trying to pass a law that says you will do this or you will do that or you're going to allow them to whatever. And it said, what if we said, how about everybody sign up that would be willing to allow these people to come into your home like we did with Shanta and coming from India. We also did it with a family from Costa Rica, 2 good friends that came to us from Scotland. And there's one more. I don't know why I'm forgetting it right off the bat. Probably because I didn't have that much to do with them. But in this case, I'm using that as a really good example to be able to say, if you want to see something change and you take responsibility for it yourself, you're going to be much happier with the results when you are taking action on it instead of trying to legislate morality and get other people to go with that. I will do this one and take a break. because it has to do with astrology. You know, we talk about astrology or numerology or phrenology or I Ching or what all, palmistry, all the rest of them out there. This is 815-6. It was done in August 31st, 1942. All right, so astrology is a fact in most instances. But astrological aspects are but signs, symbols. No influence is of greater value or of greater help than the will of an individual. Do not attempt to be guided by, but use the astrological influences as the means to meet or to overcome the faults and failures, or to minimize the faults and to magnify the virtues in self. Now, I actually came up with I'd heard about this reading for quite a while. Herb Purrier is quite a mentor for me in the Cayce material for years. And he had said one time, there's a Cayce reading that says astrology is responsible, has about a 20% effect on the karmic conditions in our life. I said, 20%? If you ask Cayce a question, he never gives you a straight answer like that. You know, it's this. I mean, there are some times when it talks about tithing, it said, how much should someone tithe? It says 10%, as all should. Wow, you get that clear an answer from something, you need to pay attention to it. And he said, how much of an effect does astrology have? 20%. I'm going, really? How in the world can it be such a set number like that? And then it became clear to me. And that is, if I hold this little clicker up right here, and I have everybody in the room looking at it from a different vector, different line coming to this, all right? Each one of you has a different perspective of what this thing looks like, all right? It's slightly different depending on where you are sitting in the room. And as a matter of fact, if I'm holding this here, you don't even see the back side of this thing, and I can tell, what color is the label on the back? Jello. But you didn't know that if you didn't see it, right? And it's from your perspective, you may not have known that was there. So what I think the Cayce readings were saying in, there with the 20% is that we have made choices in the past so that we reap what we sow. All right, and that means that we're going to wind up being able to make choices in the past that we have to reap here in the present, and that is 20% of the effect of our lives. In other words, when we are born, we can pretty much say, here are the karmic conditions that are going to come forth. However, the math, if you want to do it on there, says that 80% of what happens with these conditions that are coming to you, 80% of what happens to us from there is dictated by the will. We can change anything. We can change everything. We have 4 times more influence over what happens to us in our lives than karma ever did. And you know how many people are going, oh, this is my karma, my cross to bear, I can't get out of this. I did this before, so how could I overcome it now? All right, so that's really the point of view of what happens. But what I'm trying to say in terms of the clicker, if you're looking at it from this way, that is the 20% that you get from astrology. And then I can sit there and hold up this pair of reading glasses like that. It's the same thing. Now we're looking at it from a numerology standpoint. Now we're looking at an object from I Ching. Now we're looking at it from palmistry. And you see what I'm getting at? Each one of those is 20%. Now let's go ahead and say, all right, so I ask about 5 different things. Palmistry, I Ching, astrology, numerology, phrenology. I got 5 things, 20% each. I don't have free will anymore. And the answer is no, it's all 20%. It's just a different thing you're looking at, or a different way that you are approaching trying to be able to determine what the future is. So, do we know what the future is? Yeah, you got kind of a good idea from astrology, from numerology, where things are going to go generally, but the free will is over and above that. Now, I'll give you an example of how this can really affect you. I told you earlier, I've been self-employed. Gosh, I think I really started working for myself at about the age of 19. Although I had other jobs in the meantime there, but that was when I first became self-employed. And I had a couple of friends of mine, I don't know if we have one out here, called the Renaissance Fair, you know, over in Apache Junction. And I had these 2 friends I'd gone to college with that I'd go to the Renaissance Fair out in California. Believe me, that one's amazing. You take all of the unemployed or out of work actors who have access to all of those costumes and they want to just put on a show. Imagine what it looks like out there for about 6 weeks out of the year. So I would go over there, and we ran into this rather talented astrologer named Raymond. And so every year we would just make a habit of going to the Renaissance Fair, and we would go see Raymond, as soon as we got there. Well, one of the things that it was very unfortunate is Raymond was usually pretty backed up, and so we had quite a bit to drink by the time we got to see it. And that has an effect on your memory. So so I never remembered getting this information from him. I ran into Raymond years afterward. I was probably in my 40s. And I remember one thing I kept running into in my earlier years in self-employment was a problem with prosperity. Oh my gosh, do I have prosperity lessons I can tell you about. And it was a real challenge for me in my younger time. When I ran into Raymond later on, I said, I kept having so much trouble with prosperity in my younger years. I said, I don't have any trouble with it now. And he happened to have been looking at my chart, and he goes, oh, yeah, that's right. I went, what? It really surprised me. And he said, yeah, it's very clear that you were, in these cycles or whatever, up until you were about 40 years old, it'd be a challenge, and then you'd never be financially challenged again after that. And I went, well, I wish you would have told me. What difference would that make in your life if they wind up being able to tell you something like that? Well, I felt like I was pushing a rope as far as trying to bring prosperity into my life. It would have made me a little more introspective. It isn't that I didn't go through and learn all the prosperity lessons, and it isn't that I didn't have a real good time trying to learn about tithing until it was absolutely ingrained in me. But I would have been a lot more patient with life in terms of how I was receiving what was going on had I paid attention to that. Unfortunately, I wanted to go there and drink and have a good time at the Renaissance Fair instead of paying attention to what Raymond really was telling me. But that was one of those choices that I made along the way. But if we understand that we have 4 times the control over our lives with the free will that we have of the karmic conditions that we're coming in with, I like those odds. I like that math. I think Vegas would love to have those odds. They do a lot better than we all do, and they only have a few percentage points on their side. So it's in terms of astrology. Oh, I should probably tell you a couple of other interesting ones when it comes to being able to forecast the future, especially with numerology. Edgar Cayce said that if you knew the correct factors that had to do with a horse race, that you would 5/8 of the time be correct on forecasting the winner of a horse race. Now, I don't understand how that works, but how they have those racing sheets, and they go, if it's a dry track or a wet track, or the horse runs in this kind of dirt or that, or I don't even know what all the conditions are, but apparently even the number that the horse is wearing that day is part of the numerology that you would be able to determine who the winner was going to be, according if you knew what all those factors were. Now, again, the amount would be 62.5%. Of the time you would count it right. Well, again, those are odds that you can wind up winning pretty well with if you know how to work with it. There were one of the other things that happened is that Cayce early on was being used to be able to forecast not only horse races but stock picks. And he didn't know that these questions were being asked of him when he was in the altered state. When he came out of the altered state, he felt terrible. He'd wake up and he felt nauseous, and he'd have these headaches, and he didn't know what was going on until he found out that those questions were being asked. And by the way, he wasn't all that accurate. I mean, he'd hit some of them, and some of them he wouldn't, but he felt terrible 100% of the time until they figured out what was happening, and they started to put a kibosh on anybody but family members being able to handle the readings or conduct the readings for him at that point. This is reading number 3053-3. Did this in 11/11/1943 was the date. If you learn music, you'll learn history. If you learn music, you'll learn mathematics. If you learn music, you'll learn most all there is to learn. Now, this is not necessarily a famous person that was out there, but because I was fascinated in this, I came from a musical family. In fact, my brother retired from being a high school band director after 35 years. So I've always had music in the family. I, was a band geek as opposed to a jock back in school. So I definitely can, understand. I can read music and play instruments and stuff like that. But this was for a young child who was having a shall you call it, a argument with the mom and dad as to do I need to go and do all of the schooling that everybody else is doing when I am so interested in music. It was interesting that Cayce didn't come back and say, no, you should do, the normal curriculum like everybody else does. And he was trying to let the parents know, and the answer here, that how much is in there. If you are learning music, then you're learning about the Renaissance, you're learning about the Romantic period, you're learning about the Dark Ages, you're learning about history, and then you learn about mathematics. How many people in here actually can read music? So I got, 4 or 5. You can read music. If you've been through that, then you understand that there is a lot of mathematics in music. And it's especially true if you get that thing that's called an oscilloscope out and you start understanding what chord progressions are and things like that, and what they call third or fifth or harmonics and things like that are all mathematical models that end up sounding like musical notes. That's what we hear in musical notes when it's actually math. I call it God on a chalkboard. But all of these things come out. And so Cayce is trying to make it clear to the parents in this particular case that the child is not that far off saying, I need to really study music. Anyone ever heard of you've heard of J.R.R. Tolkien, but have you ever heard of a book he wrote called The Silmarillion? Not one of his more popular ones. Go to a bookstore and pick that out. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to do that. Go find the Silmarillion on Amazon.com, and you know how they let you start going into the opening pages of the thing? I did this. I was able to open it up and go in there, and it starts giving you a description of what it was like for souls to exist before there was a manifest universe. No planets, no stars, no suns, no space dust. It was just all thought. And what do you wind up having as being the main mode of entertainment if all you have is thought? Music, because your thoughts and the vibratory patterns that come from them combine to be, as we would understand music, hearing it through the human ear. So before the beginning, music was all that, well, I don't want to say it was the only thing, but music was really a big mode of entertainment for us. So our thought vibrations combine like musical notes played by an orchestra to create musical masterpieces or monstrosities. You do have a choice. You can make beautiful music or you can do something else. But understanding this concept was really important to me because of, as I said before, this God on a chalkboard, there's something to it. I did want to talk about, just for a minute, because we have our YouTube audience out there, and that is, we wind up having, maybe 20 people in here, at these lectures like this. Do you know that, let's see, this is now March? For 15 months now, we have been putting the recordings of these videos online with YouTube. We have over 190,000 views of these lectures. So you can get 20 or so people to show up in a room to be able to listen to this, and you can get 10,000 a month or more to be able to listen to this. But the reason I'm bringing up that statistic is when I'm talking about God on a that was a book I wrote. God on a chalkboard, you wind up hitting the one lecture that I gave on this, and I don't know how many of you actually saw it, where I start showing how does spirit manifest in 3 dimensions. We've had over 40,000 views on that one lecture alone. People are fascinated to understand, how does music look in 3 dimensions? What does it look like in spirit when it manifests actually here in 3 dimensions on the earth? So I think we haven't really explored that enough, and this really touches on just exactly what we're after for that. When we think about how much of an effect music has on us, one of the funniest examples I can think of was for 9 years, Stephanie, my wife, and I owned a no-alcohol teenage nightclub. Don't ever do that. But it was quite a learning experience for us. And this was not a small place. I mean, we could hold over 1,000 people inside the building. So it was very crowded, and believe me, teenagers are not always on their best behavior when you get them in a social environment like that. I see all the moms going, yeah, I can believe that. So we wind up having problems. You can see it brewing where you've got these, these people are kind of squaring off and they're just, talking to each other and they're going to have a fight or whatever. And the quickest way that you can settle that down is to go up to the disc jockey and tell him to put on a slow song, a ballad. Because you've got that thump, 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 and it's really driving them and they're going through it and they're really getting pumped up and you're going, throw that slow song ballad on so all the couples can go out there on the floor and it just takes the wind right out of the sails. I mean, that was one of the clearest examples I'd ever seen in my life, to watch all getting so hyped up. And I remember the first time that it really got me was I was in there and I was with all the other security guys trying to make sure everything went on. And I hit the radio. We had these like this headset. It was tell the disc jockey to put on a ballad. And as soon as that went on, one of the guys that was just so hyped, he goes, "Oh, ain't nobody going to fight now." And he just turned around and walked away just like that. And I went, "Oh, yeah, I'm very happy about this." So the whole idea of how, music just about touches every aspect of our lives and can even have practical applications when it comes to that. This comes to mind. I good friends of ours, Herb and Ann Purrier, were very into the Cayce readings and came to visit us in California. They live here in Phoenix, but came to visit us in California. And Ann has the ability to see auras. And so I'm standing there, I'm talking to Ann, and Herb gets fascinated, and he starts walking into the teen nightclub where the 120 decibel music's going. And I said, "Ann, tell me what his aura is doing." As he walks into the place, and so she's, seeing his normal auric pattern around him. If you're not familiar with that, that's the energy colors that some people are able to see around the body. And so she was watching as he slowly, and he walked closer and closer to the dance floor, and she goes, "Well, nothing." And she goes, "Oh my." And she just stops like that. I said, "What?" She goes, "His aura, the closer he gets to everybody on the dance floor, becomes a solid red." That it was just that energy, that driving. And even when you take somebody who's probably one of the more spiritual people I've ever met in my life, and there he is, and he gets closer and closer to that dance floor, and it just takes you. And boy, when you want to start talking about who do you hang out with, and what kind of an effect that has, you're thinking, he just got close to that dance floor, and the next thing you know, he's got a red auric pattern. So just keep that in mind, and you understand vibratory patterns, and you understand music, and why this is one of the more important concepts if we start studying it. You might know this one as when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, but when you're prepared for a thing, the opportunity to use it presents itself. That's 3544-1. One of the reasons that I've noticed that the greatest, this isn't universal, but I've found some of the more profound readings that I get from the Edgar Cayce readings happen in the later years of his life. He would, in 363 days, he was going to be dead. So this was one of the, this is given in the last year that he ever gave readings at all. But when you're prepared for a thing, the opportunity to use it presents itself. So again, like I said, the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I think this is also true of things that we ask for. God help us if we pray for patience. Everybody knows what happens if you pray for patience. You don't get patience, you get the opportunity to practice patience. So you have to be very careful what you ask for when it comes to something like this. And a lot of this has to do in terms of timing. Example I want to give here is if you have a farm out there and you're growing food and feeding thousands of people, and you have a little kid on the farm and he goes, "I want to drive the big tractor." Right? You can't drive that. You will do so much damage if you drive the big tractor. "Oh yeah, but it's fun and I want to do it." No, that is not the right thing for that kid to do. But the kid puts, 10, 15 years under him, and then he can't avoid the tractor. No, you get him on the tractor, and the next thing you know, given the right time, when you're prepared for a thing, the opportunity presents itself. Instead of him being the worst thing that ever happened to that farm, suddenly he's working within harmony and he's feeding thousands of people because it was the right place at the right time with the right person, the right skills, and all that sort of thing. So we have to make sure that we are ready to be able to handle something. So if we find that we're not given the opportunity to be able to do something, I think that that's telling us we're not necessarily prepared. Are we looking for our soulmate? We're not necessarily prepared in order to be able to meet that particular person. You know, I'm thinking of another story. I should have brought that up back in the Soulmates time, but there was a strong, I'll just leave it at this, strong supporter of the Edgar Cayce readings. He had over 200 readings. It was done, and all of a sudden one day, he starts asking about, I've met this girl. And he goes, I'm very curious as to, is this good marriage material for me? Now, the readings would typically have an answer that says that is not for this source to be able to, offer. You should be making these choices within yourself. Well, just like that 20% or tied 10% is all should, it came back and said, don't marry her. I was so surprised to see something. He said, you should not, it is, not good for either one of you. He said, I understand why there's the attraction, but it would not be good for you to share this life together. He kept having readings about every 2 or 3 months after that. Like I said, he was well known within the Cayce legacy. He kept asking about this girl every single time. Anything changed, Edgar? He said, should not marry this one. This is not going to work out well for either one of you. It'll be, it'll quickly, come to a head and you will not get along at all. And then I'm not kidding, this went on for 1.5 years. That he was still dating this girl, still asking each and every time. Finally, Edgar Cayce, the answer in the source changed his mind. He says, oh, go ahead and marry her. You'll learn a whole lot when you do. By the way, he married her. They divorced not too long after that. So it's just, you can listen to this stuff or you don't. All right, so the opportunity presents itself sometimes when we're not given our soulmate, we're not ready for them. Or if we're not ready to be able to handle money, maybe we're trying to drive a tractor before we're able to do anything good with that. He said, God, let me win the lottery so I can do all this good with the money. And he said, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. Have you ever read those articles about what happens to lottery winners and they wind up being more broke than they were when they started? I mean, it's just scary stuff to come back to all that. Here's another interesting one since we're talking about YouTube and doing the talking up here. I was not a good public speaker. I mean, if I have trouble or stumble over my words now, you should have seen me when I started this, 30 years ago. And what was funny was, again, the same person that had given me the reading before and told me about the Atlantean times said, I actually see you speaking to thousands of people. I'm going, I don't think so, because when you go to a church or local venues, I think the most we've ever had in here at any one time was around 80 people to be able to hear a presentation. I'm going, I don't see, I mean, even with their big sanctuary next door, you can't fit more than 1,000. You can't even quite get 1,000 people in that sanctuary there. How could I ever possibly do that? Not only do I not have the public speaking skills of Richard Mirage to be able to do that. Oh, I thought I was being waved at. I'm sorry. I don't necessarily have that. Especially in the early days, there was no way I was going to be able to do it. And then YouTube came along. I just mentioned this talk right here, I guarantee will have 10,000 views on it, on our channel there before the month is out. It's just that consistent right now. We even have 2,200 people that have hit the subscribe button so that they're automatically notified the next time we have any new video available for them to watch. I mean, it's really something whose time has come. So when you're prepared for a thing, and I'm doing these kind of talks, if I'm supposed to be talking, and Steve Bobbitt as well, who shares the speaking duties here with me, even if we're prepared for it, then YouTube presents the opportunity. Even if we're not talking in a place that can hold thousands of people here, you can still wind up reaching people in a very meaningful way, but not until you're ready. I told you this was coming. I was the one that put if you can laugh at it, you can heal from it. This is so important that we have this concept. And from Cayce reading 2647-1, remember that a good laugh and arousing even to what might in some be called hilariousness is good for the body, physically, mentally. Okay, so when you can wind up being able to laugh and take humor in everything. I don't know if you've ever seen, in fact, Edgar Cayce, the younger son of Edgar, wound up writing a short little book called The Humor in the Edgar Cayce Readings. It's actually a lot of fun to read because it definitely, there is a brand of humor that does come out of the readings if you follow it up enough. But I would have to say one of the things that with my soulmate, Stephanie, over there, is that we do share a very similar sense of humor. For instance, after all the years that we've, like I said, we're coming up on 36 years of marriage now, and she's still finding new things that she is so glad she married me for. I can drive at night. If you're looking for a husband and you're over 50 years old, driving at night is apparently high on the list. So, yeah, I'm getting all these nods out there. Boy, do we wind up having a different shifting set of priorities and all that. But if you get to know me well enough, I wind up having a kind of an ongoing joking personality out there, and I laugh at him, and Stephanie laughs at him, and that's part of that soulmate. We're the only ones that laugh at him, but that's that's the soulmate side of us sticking together there. But I think it is so important to be able to share that sense of humor with a significant other, and certainly with your friends. So the example that I love to be able to give with this, is anybody familiar with Norman Cousins? Yeah, he was famous back in the 60s, and you will actually know who he is even if you don't know his name in particular. Did you ever hear about the guy who had a terminal disease, was given 2 months to live, pretty much locked himself up away, like in a hotel room, if you will, and did nothing but watch funny videos, read funny books, just laugh himself into health, and it worked. And he is the one that actually documented it, and he was well known ahead of time. I've got notes down here that he was the chief editor of the Saturday Review. He had actually won the United Nations Peace Medal, and he had 50, count them, 50 honorary degrees from prestigious colleges throughout the United States. I mean, this was a well-known individual, especially in the writing circles, and wound up, it's one of those great big long Latin terms. It wasn't cancer, but it was something close, and was given 2 months to live when he was able to completely turn this around and wrote a very important book about it. But that laughter apparently is good for the body physically and mentally. Question, and can't read, 826-8. If a soul fails to improve itself, what becomes of it? Answer, that's why the reincarnation, why it reincarnates, that it may have the opportunity. Can the will of man continue to defy its maker? Can the will of man continue to defy its maker? I'll tell you how I love to think about what the reincarnation cycle is all about. You ever play a game of old-fashioned pinball, where you have a little steel ball and you pull a plunger and it puts the ball into play and it bounces around in the bumpers and all of that? Where's that ball inevitably going to wind up? Right back in the hopper, where it came from, so it can get put into play again, and it'll hit a whole different set of combinations of bumpers and flippers and all the rest of that stuff out there. But it always comes to my mind as far as, okay, there's an infinite number of combinations of how that ball is put into play out there, but the inevitability that you will return to the home, to God, to the hopper down at the bottom, it's because God has stacked the deck of life in our favor. Now, I don't see that being against us. I see it being stacked in our favor so that inevitably we are all going to see the wisdom of accepting his unconditionally loving ways for our own. So it just makes sense that if you're going to live sustainably, happy forever, how do you do that? It only works if everybody wins instead of one person's trying to get over on another. And once you finally figure out the logic of that, then it's real easy to start making the right decisions to be able to go that way. I knew there was one other thing. Oh, here's the math of of what I'm talking about here. Here are the conflicting things. In 2 Peter 3:9, it says, God is unwilling to lose any soul. You've probably heard that one before. God's unwilling to lose even one of us, one of his beloved children that he created. If he's unwilling to lose even one of us, then he gave us free will so that we could forever, if we choose, decide to not be one with him. He doesn't want to lose us, but we, because we have free will, can make choices that make us wind up being here on earth, as opposed to being free to go wherever we want and play well with others. It's kind of the bottom line there. So if you wind up having those two conflicting things, how does it work that eventually each and every one of us do things even greater than Jesus did? The only logical answer in my mind is an infinite number of chances to get it right. If you're going to have the right to screw it up over and over and over again, the only way that God is able to accomplish his will, which I'm pretty clear on the fact that he wouldn't have created this whole universe if he wasn't going to get it the way he wanted it. So if he's unwilling to lose even one soul, how do you wind up getting that? By giving us an infinite number of chances to get it right. Well, we call that reincarnation. And I just can't think of a more cause and effect or logical explanation behind why reincarnation has to be a fact. Everyone wins. The purpose, down here 4047-2. The purpose in life then is not the gratifying of appetites, nor of any selfish desires, but it is that the entity, the soul, may make the earth where the entity finds its consciousness a better place in which to live. Similar concept when it comes to creating heaven on earth, for ourselves. But again, Cayce's point on this, and I keep coming back to it because of how important and how different it is from what all the other religions that say, we got to get the heck out of Dodge. That concept in and of itself is inevitable. It leaves us with this bad taste in our mouth. How many people that believe in reincarnation go, oh, I hope this is my last lifetime here? All right? I hate to say it, but my wife and I actually like it here. I'll come back, and apparently I'm going to get to. It's funny when Charles Thomas Cayce, who passed away a couple of years ago now, but he actually gave a lecture here at Unity of Phoenix on something called Reincarnation Unnecessary. He did a whole Saturday workshop, and what it did is it looked at the 18 people that were given readings by Edgar Cayce that said, if all goes well in this lifetime, you will not have to return, that you will have spiritually progressed to the point where you will not have to incarnate back in as a human. By the way, Charles Thomas said 18, and I asked if it was correct that Edgar Cayce was included in that 18 or not, because he was told he didn't have to return either. He was not, so there's truly 19, just to be specific on that. But they looked at it from all kinds of angles. When were they born? Like, what astrological sign did they have? Were they male or female? What part of the geography, what part of the world were they born? Where did they live, grow up? What was their education? And they looked at all these factors. The astrology one was pointed out to me because I was adding up of the 18 or 19 people that were on there. I'm a Virgo, and none of them were Virgos. I think there were only two sun signs that were not in that list of 18. So I'm apparently going to come back. Oh well, thank God I'm one of the ones who wants to. Well, if you're trying to make sure that you are creating heaven on earth, you wind up having this concept, and I guess probably the best way to put it is banks will not loan people money unless they don't need it anymore. You ever heard that one? You go to a bank, you apply for a loan, they're going, sorry, you don't qualify. The only people that qualify are those that don't need to borrow money. I hate to tell you, I really get the feeling that this is almost how it works in the universe. And not talking about borrowing money, but talking about as soon as we don't desperately need that significant other to be able to get by in life until we're ready for it. Remember, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. I think the moment that we prepare ourselves in order to be able to handle all the wonderful things that we want in life, we don't need them anymore. But we start to understand that God is our source, that the heaven is truly here on earth, and the kingdom of heaven is certainly within us. So we don't find heaven until we stop making all those hellish choices in our lives. Reading 4016-1, and then apparently it has got a reference here to reading 322-44. Oh, I'm sorry, that's probably, I'll bet that's March 22nd, 1944. It's just not got a dash in there. So that was the date of the reading. All right, so healing of the physical without the change in the mental and spiritual aspects brings little real help to the individual in the end. How true? Because the mind and the body imprint and imitate each other. What we think, we become. What we become, we think. It's an insidious process that can predispose us to illness, or it can lead us to health. You ever hear of that thing of a vicious cycle downward? There's a vicious cycle upward too. You know, when you get on a roll and you start doing things right, we've all experienced, hey, everything's going right for me in this time. So I really wanted to point out in terms of healing. In fact, not too long ago in the study group that we have here, one of our members brought his wife along, and she was a chaplain, at a church. And she took exception to when I said, in the Cayce material, you are advised not to pray for somebody to be healed unless they have requested it. All right? And she goes, it's never a problem to pray for someone to be healed because God never wants us to be sick. I'm going, God may not want us to be sick, but we, through our thoughts, have brought about conditions that have created an illness. First of all, if our thoughts are in exact alignment, of course the body's going to wind up having these kind of manifestations because the body, as it says up here, one is an imprint and imitates the other. So if we've got sick thoughts, we have a sick body. And if we do things to our body that winds up affecting our thoughts in the other direction, like an addiction or something like that. So if you have those two things, if the person doesn't want to be healed, then praying for them to be healed is not good. It's just not the right way to go. I like seeing God on a chalkboard, and I love this story that had to do with, I worked in gas stations when I was still in high school. And I remember seeing this car that had been in a wreck, and so they had to replace the radiator and all that. And the fan, with the fan belt and all that behind the radiator, it draws air through to get the car cooled down. One of the fan blades was bent, and if everything's standing up like this, one of the fan blades was just like that. And so I kind of went up there and I just bent on it, and I was able to get it right back so it was lined up where it was supposed to be. And the mechanic just started laughing. He goes, "Oh boy, would that get you in trouble?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "I'll show you." So he's got the car put back together, and he did have a replacement fan for it, but he started that car up and run for about 30, 60 seconds, turned it off, and that fan blade had already bent back to its original position. Oh, Mary knows all about cars. She goes, "You can't do that." Yeah, it's a fascinating one, because what happened is that fan blade had the metal memory that says, this is my position. And you can bend it until it's straight again. It goes, but this is me now. And so until you fix it, until you repair it, until you get your mind in alignment with how you want the body healed, the body will not stay well. The body won't stay well at all. If our thoughts are still not in alignment and still not healthy, then the body will still conform to where the thoughts are out there. So it's so important to understand what's saying that if the body is imitating the mind and the mind imitating the body, you can have the question that comes up, why do you want to be healed? It says, please heal me. Why do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed so that you can go out there and continue to do all the awful things that got you into this shape to begin with? Then why bother? Why would we bother if you're trying to get healed and all you're going to do is the same thing that got you in trouble to begin with? So this is such an important concept that says if we are trying to make major changes in our life, we're not just trying to get healthy. We're not just trying to get more money into our life. We're not just trying to find our soulmate. What we are really trying to do is to heal ourselves up here, and then the body can't, and conditions around us can't help but conform to what it is that's going on inside of our minds. You with me on that? Again, this is one of the more important ones that you ever hear about. You can never lose anything that really belongs to you. And you can't keep that which belongs to someone else. 3654-1. It was done on January 22nd, 1944. This one was fascinating because when I found the quote online, I looked it up to get the background on who this person was. It was a chef that wouldn't share their recipes. Isn't that weird? Well, of course, I don't cook, so I'm not very covetous of my recipes. They're usually on the back of a Bisquick box, so it's kind of hard to keep those secret. But you can tell if it is affecting us from the idea of what recipes that we want to share out there. You know it's got to affect every aspect of our lives out there. I had a situation in which a guy that I worked with and for out in California for a period of time, he said, would you come out and help me to be able to turn this business around? Actually, what he owned was a retail shopping center, and he just owned the property. The people that had leased the whole thing from him went belly up, handed him the keys, and said, we can't make this work, and left about, it was half, I don't know if it was half full or half empty with tenants, but they only had about a 50% occupancy. Handed him the keys, and he's like, oh my gosh, this was in April of '92. Anybody know what's important about that month and date? That was in Los Angeles when they had the Rodney King riots. So having a retail business at that time was not probably the best thing you could do out there. And he was trying to figure out, do I want to keep this or not? Well, he contacts me, Stephanie and I lived out here, and said, would you come back and help me to be able to turn this place around? I said, yes, I will. I was fascinated because, first of all, he was incredibly wealthy, worth a couple of $100 million. And he said, and I will put all of it behind you to be able to get this to turn around. I'm going, I never had something where a budget wasn't an issue, where I could just figure out what I need to do and I had enough money to be able to make it happen. By the way, it's still 100% full today and going strong. So yes, we were able to turn that thing around, and it was really a good experience for me in so many ways. But I told him when I went out there that I was only going to stay for 3 years because this is my spiritual home. This is really where I did want to live. I do want to live. I want to stay here for as long as I can. I did not want to be, I left California because I didn't want to be there anymore. Well, when obviously when we had turned the place around, he was making sure that I was happy financially and all that. So life was pretty good. And then when I let him know that I was going to come back here, he starts throwing more money at me. I said, thank you very much, I'm still leaving. He threw more money at me. Thank you very much, I'm still leaving. And the next thing you know, it's like, okay, I'm going to yank everything away from you I possibly can because I don't know how else to deal with people when you're 200 million, in assets. Because if I can't buy you, then I'm going to make your life as miserable as I possibly can. I went, really? I mean, is that what this is all about after as closely as we worked together with all that? What was interesting was I wound up getting to the point where, okay, I'm leaving the end of the year, and Stephanie had already had, remember that receptionist job I said at the private college? She had left 3 days before the end of the year to go start at that job. That left me back in California packing the whole house. So there I am. I kid you not, I was working my tail end off trying to make sure that they were able to get by without me when I left, and I go back and I'm packing and packing and packing, and it's New Year's Eve. And so here I am, and I turn on the radio, and I'm listening to talk radio, and here's what the radio personality was saying. Well, here it is, New Year's Eve, and what was it, 96 going to 97. And he goes, and if you're listening to this show right now, you are pathetic. I'm pathetic. And then I thought about it going, yep, I don't have a job right now, and this guy has just, tried to keep me from having all the money that, that I should have been getting as a lump sum when I was leaving, in fact, an income for life after that, and he's trying to cut me off from all of it. And there I am packing all on my own. My wife's not even in town, and I am listening to this guy on New Year's Eve, and I am pathetic. And even as it was coming out, I still was smiling. I was laughing. I was joyous because I knew as soon as I could get that stuff packed and put into a moving van and get the heck over here, that I was going to be absolutely happy as could be. I wasn't even thinking about all the money at that point. But I can tell you that it didn't even take within 6 months of the time that I moved back out here. That was, I don't know if you follow real estate trends, but that was in 1997, and that was when I changed a career and went into the mortgage business. That was an outstanding time to get into the mortgage business. And so everything just kept growing and growing from there. So I got in at the ground floor of something, and it just turned into being incredibly prosperous for us. And within 6 months, I was making more money than I was when I was back in California. Go back to this. No matter how hard he tried in order to be able to take something from me, it really did belong to me. And someone else can't take that away from me. He's still worth all that money out there, but he couldn't take the wealth that was truly mine, that I had earned, that came to me through efforts and through a prosperity consciousness in order to make all that happen. So it was just a very short period of time until that whole thing turned around. This is it's a video, and I have to go hit the start button over there to get it to happen. But what you're getting ready to see here, maybe some of you have seen this before. Have you ever heard how they catch these monkeys down in Africa? They literally dig a hole in the ground, and they put this type of nut down into the hole, and the hole's rather small. So they drop the nuts into the hole, and the monkey can smell it, knows it's in there, is able to squeeze its hand in like that, grabs the nuts, and because it won't let go of the nuts, it can't get its hand out of there. The only time it lets go of them is after they've already been able to capture the thing. If you think I'm kidding, wait till you see the video. So what you're seeing right there is just one of the indigenous natives, and they've set this thing up with the camera and the hole so that you're able to see what's happening inside of the hole with the nuts at the same time. So where he's standing, he's dropping the nuts inside of this smaller hole that the monkey is eventually going to stick his hand in, and now you can see that the nuts are falling down below. So there's a camera in there catching not only the outside angle, but the inside angle. This monkey's watching him. Says, okay, I know it's in there. I can smell it. I know it's up. And all he's going to do is just move out of the way. So obviously he gets to, the monkey says, okay, it's safe enough. I'm going to go ahead and venture over there and see what I can see about the nuts that I saw him drop into that hole. And in he goes. There he grabs them. And he almost immediately realizes what's going on. Now, mind you, nothing's holding him there except he's not letting go of the nuts. So now he's got a, just kind of like a leash over there. And the monkey, all he has to do is let go of the thing, because what you're going to see is when he puts the leash on him, the monkey finally lets go. I mean, he doesn't have to yank him out of there. How many of us have been that monkey? I'm saying in an analogy, in a scenario, not that we've actually done that. But when have we grabbed onto something that we easily could have let go of to our own detriment? And we should have let go of it a long time ago. In fact, we shouldn't have even been looking at it to say, I should go in there and grab that. Should have just left it alone from the very beginning and figured out how else to go about life and, pursue God's unconditionally loving ways. All right, so if our earthly desires get the better of us in something like that, I can't think of a better description that shows exactly what we have done to ourselves, and all we have to do is let go and let God, as the adage or the cliche goes. So in so many cases, in fact, Cayce has quotes that on a number of occasions of letting go and letting God. That doesn't mean that we just try to say, God, make all my choices for me. If God wanted that, we would have never been given free will. What God wants each one of us to do is to align our free will with His. There isn't just one perfect answer in every case that we should be saying, okay, God, what's the perfect answer? God will say, here's an infinite number of perfect choices that you can make where everybody comes out ahead. Pick the one that you feel the happiest with, where you don't come out ahead of somebody else and they don't come out ahead of over you, that nobody is seen as taking advantage of the other side. And there are all kinds of choices that meet that parameter. We don't have to do just the one thing. And I think that's where we get very lost in theology. You have to do it this way or you're going to wind up in the bad place. All right. So the whole idea is to understand, make decisions whereby we are in a win-win, that everybody comes out ahead, and then you don't wind up having this kind of a situation as you see right here. And that's it.